Some say that he does have ties to Muslim extremists. I don't know.
On June 3, 1989, Ayatollah Sayyid Ruhollah Musavi Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, passed away at the age of 89. Millions flocked to the streets of Tehran mourning the death of the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, especially from the Muslim world, to pay tribute to a man whose life set an example for anyone thirsty for liberation, justice, and humanity. More than 3 decades after his death, Ayatollah Khomeini's memory lives on and his ideas still inspire freedom seekers of the world. At the core of Imam Khomeini's lies the overarching concept of resistance. Resistance against any encroaching entity that targets the heart of a nation, its history, identity, and sovereignty. Heroic resistance against the colonial powers of the time.
خب امام مسیر مقاومت را انتخاب کرده است. مطلب مهم اینه که امام مقاومت را از روی هیجان زدگی انتخاب نکرد، از روی احساسات زودگذر انتخاب نکرد. پشتوانه انتخاب مقاومت از سوی ما یک پشتوانه منطقی است. یک جزء این منطق این است که مقاومت واکنش طبیعی هر ملت آزاده و با شرف در مقابل تحمیل و زورگویی است.
The Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979 was the epitome of an active, effective resistance against the imperialism of the United States and a revolt against its puppet ruler in the country.
The Shah of Iran used to call himself the King of Kings. Anyway, in order not to go too deep into history, Shah Muhammad Reza Pahlavi ruled Iran, and at the beginning of the 1960s, of course, he was a dictator, an oppressive ruler. There was no freedom, there was no will of the people, there was no priority given to the concerns of the people domestically, and as much as possible, he tried to keep the people away from their culture and their religion and their Islam and their sanctities and their history and their heritage. And also, he made it as a member of the American-led Axis.
In the absence of such resistance, nations are first robbed of their natural resources and then become big marketplaces for Western goods. The oil-rich Saudi kingdom is a case in point, a country humiliated over and over again by the Americans, despite the billions of dollars it gives to Washington in the form of arms deals. But in fact, it is the money Riyadh gives as a bribe.
امروز دولت سعودی هم همین جوره. هم پول میده، هم دلار میده، هم بر طبق خواست آمریکا موضع گیری میکنه، هم توهین میشنوه. بهش میگن گاو شیرده.
Imam Khomeini called on all Muslims across the world to rediscover their Islamic identity, regain their confidence and resist against the hegemony of foreign powers, with the ultimate goal of liberation from the yoke of colonialism in form.
همه بدبختی‌های شرقی‌ها هم از اون جمله ماها، همه گرفتاری‌های ما و بدبختی‌های ما هم همین است که خودمون را گم کردیم، یک کسی دیگه به جای ما نشسته است.
It is not an exaggeration to say that it is the Imam's discourse of resistance that has foiled many imperialistic plots by the world powers in Western Asia, if not in other places around the world.
همین شکست هایی که این چند سال آمریکایی ها در عراق و در سوریه و در لبنان و در فلسطین و اینها داشتن محصول مقاومت گروه های مقاومت است. جبهه مقاومت امروز یک جبهه قوی است.
Ayatollah Khomeini believed Muslims the world over would be able to ease their plights through unity and solidarity. As a Muslim scholar, he called on all Muslim nations to gain intellectual independence from the West and revive and repeat their glorious past.
روشنفکرای ما و نویسندگان ما و تمام طبقه عالم و روشنفکر توجه به مفاخر خودشون داشته باشند. اینقدر طرف غرب سجده نکنند.
Imam Khomeini drew attention to self-sufficiency and self-reliance as a prerequisite to the real development of nations.
باید عرض کنم که تا ملت شرق خودش نفهمد این معنا را که خودش هم یک موجودی است، خودش هم یک ملتی است، شرق هم یک جایی است، نمیتواند استقلال خودش را به دست بیارد.
The resistance movement Imam Khomeini initiated was against the tyranny and injustice Iranians faced under the rule of Mohammad Reza Shah. The movement, however, evolved into the biggest revolution in the final decades of the 20th century and inspired, in the coming decades, many other countries in the Muslim world to stand up against their tyrannical rulers. Massive protests in 2011, which rocked the Arab world, could be regarded as the continuation of the movement led by Ayatollah Khomeini, which resulted in the fall of the Shah of Iran. At the same time, Ayatollah Khomeini attached great importance to the issue of Palestine. Resistance on behalf of the Muslim world could show its peak in fighting against the Israeli regime, which he likened to a cancerous tumor, and considered the occupation of Palestine as a broader occupation planned for the rest of the Arab world. He said, "Everyone should realize that the goals pursued by superpowers by creating Israel did not end in the occupation of Palestine. They plan, heaven forbid, to extend the fate of Palestine to all Arab countries." The fact is, Ayatollah Khomeini raised the alarm as far as the 1960s, almost 15 years after the creation of the Israeli regime, when the threat of Israel as a regime that could endanger peace and security in the region, neither regionally nor globally. After the victory of the Islamic Revolution, the Imam continued to address the issue of Palestine as the main issue in the Muslim world, not an issue having to do with the Arabs alone. Even today, the major pro-Palestinian resistance movements and organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas that stand against the occupying regime of Israel are all the legacy of Imam Khomeini's support for the oppressed people of Palestine. It is hard to imagine how the Middle East would look like without a resistance hero like Ayatollah Khomeini.